During the ongoing atrocities, our most crucial advocates have been the Palestinian journalists of Gaza. وائل الدحدوح, Palestine العقاد, Ahmad Hijazi, Mu'taz Azaiza, to name a few, and many others who have been risking their lives, covering on ground the war crimes being committed against their people, and documenting it to the whole world. Our platform here today is to amplify their voices and examine the role of journalists and influencers in times of war. So without further ado, join me in welcoming today's panelists. Shaun King, activist and journalist from the US. Zeena Aqel, Palestinian journalist and influencer. Ahmad Hussam, influencer and videographer. Tadhg Hicky, comedian, actor, and writer and musician from Ireland. And last but not least, our moderator for this evening, Jamal Elshayyal, manager of content strategy at Aljazeera Digital Division.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Moza. Thank you all for being here. I know it's a massive crowd, and I know there was a lot of people who wanted to join. Unfortunately, due to limited spaces, weren't able to. So thank you to Aljazeera Media Institute, as well as Doha, or Qatar Debate, for organizing this and putting this together. And thank you, everyone, for making the time in your schedules to come. I just want to pick up where Moza left off with regards to actually, the people on the ground and the journalists on the ground. She mentioned a few, from Wa'il al-Dahduh to several others. Bilal Khalid is one of them. There's Yumna, who works for Aljazeera English, and others who really are, I would say, the front line in what has been or what continues to be a genocidal war, not just on the people of Palestine, but actually on the very essence of anything that we all hold dear to in terms of human rights, in terms of freedom, and just the freedom to actually live. And I guess we all owe them so much in terms of prayer and support that is the little that we can offer, but at least to mention and recognize the efforts that they make. So I just wanted to start off by that, and then we'll get into this discussion, which the way I'm hoping to do it, we're going to go through a few different themes with each one of you, and then maybe we'll open it up to the floor, because I know there are a lot of people who want to discuss and hear your thoughts. So we're looking at the role of influencers, the role of digital platforms, the role of those who have specific audiences and reach to advocate for human rights. Right, Shaun, you are somebody, and we spoke actually on a show a couple of weeks ago where we were talking about, you're somebody who's used your platform for different justice causes, right? Maybe ones that were closer to home as an American. When you're talking about police brutality, you're talking about the race relations and countering racism. And that shift that you made, or not necessarily a shift, but at least a focus in terms of dedicating your voice to those oppressed now in Palestine. If you want to talk us through a bit about that experience and what motivated you.
Sure. Well, first, thank you, and thank all of you for having me. I think I took photos with half of you, and so thank you for the love and support. Many of you who've spent the past few days with me have heard me say this, but some of my nearest and dearest friends are Palestinian. They're closer than friends. They're like family to me, that are not just supporters of mine. We've been through high and low together. We have supported each other through difficult moments in life as parents, just not just fighting for civil rights and human rights together. But I have to start there, because you do fight for your family. You stand up for your friends. And so many times over gosh, the past 15 years of my life, Palestinians have stood up for me, have advocated for me, have marched and protested and demonstrated with me and asked for nothing. They did it because we were friends. They did it because they saw injustice. They did it because injustice was familiar to them. And solidarity is about being there for your family in their time of need. And when October 7th happened, on that day and for the next 24 hours, I did not know what to say or how to say it, but I knew that it was only a matter of not days, but hours before a very horrible response was going to take place. And it happened faster and got worse than I anticipated. And initially, I just felt that it was my obligation to speak up, in part because the mainstream media in the United States was not telling even the initial stories of some of the atrocities that I saw. In those first few days, on the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th, I saw about 100 Palestinian children who were killed, and I thought at that time it was the worst thing I had ever seen. And I could not imagine at that point 1,000 Palestinian children being killed. I'm a father of 5, and so much of the work that I do as a father. I have 4 girls and a son, and I saw my children in those children. I saw the pain of fathers and mothers holding their children who were injured or killed, and it just broke me, man. And at first, I just spoke not as a leader, but the first words that I said as a father. This is wrong. This is unjust. This should not happen to children. And I could not have predicted that nearly 70 days later, we would be, if you saw, people are confused because it's difficult to track the accurate numbers of who has been killed, but we're nearing probably 25,000 people that have been killed. We're close to 10,000 children. And so I felt that it was my obligation as someone who is not Palestinian, who is not Muslim, who is not an Arab American. I felt it was my obligation for, at first, my friends to see me advocating for them the way they had advocated for me and my causes. But within a matter of days, it went from me advocating for my friends to me talking about what I felt was the most important issue in the world.
So just before I move on, you've indirectly spoken about ultimately the human connection, right?
Sure.
So human connection through friendship and human connection through shared experiences of oppression, and that for that you have to see the other person as a human. And we'll talk about dehumanization and maybe other things with some of the other panels. But I want to ask you just specifically about a specific unique experience that you might have, and we'll go through everyone's unique experiences here, is that you were somebody who was welcomed by, let's say, at least some of the, I won't say all the mainstream Democrats, but a large part of them when there was the whole anti-Trump movement and the anti-Trump narrative. Sure. And bringing on. Now, those people, or a lot of them, have been vehemently in support of Israel. And in fact have been some of the ones who have been calling for, unchallenged support for Israel's continued genocide in Gaza. Have you had a personal backlash of using your platform for that? Have you lost friends or colleagues who had claimed to be supporters of justice and justice causes, but have turned out to be selective in their outrage?
So I think anybody who has a heart and has been speaking out for Palestinians have also been crushed by either the silence of people that they thought would say better and do better, the abandonment of people that I thought would stand up and speak up, people that I had been an ally of in the past that I thought would be here for this. But I'm not discouraged because I saw a poll recently that said that almost 99% of American senators have not called for a ceasefire, but almost 70% of Americans, the people, do want a ceasefire. That's from both political parties, that's from almost every racial group, ethnic group, nationality, faith, religion. So what we see around the world, not just in the United States, is an enormous divide between the masses of people and the leaders that have either been elected or appointed. And there is an extreme disappointment, not just from me, but I speak now to Palestinians in Gaza. I probably exchange messages with 200 to 300 Gazans a day, checking on them, sending voice notes to them, encouraging them. And the one thing that they say to me that breaks my heart every day is that they expected somebody to show up. They thought some government, some country, some organization, some international body, a neighbor, they thought someone would intervene. I have seen fathers and mothers with pieces of their children crying to the camera, saying, naming by name, leaders, saying, "Where are you? How could you leave me here?" I saw a video yesterday of a woman who had just lost her entire family, a mother, and she named a very particular leader from this region that she said she loved. She said that this was her hero. And she's, "Where are you?" And I can't imagine the despair of enduring so much violence every day and starting to wonder, is it true that no one is going to show up? And I think leaders all around the world should be ashamed. I am ashamed for them. And there are in each of our lives, each of you will have a moment where you should put it all on the line, where you should risk your life, you should be willing to die, you should be willing to suffer. If this is not that moment, I don't know what is. Like if this is not the moment for a leader to put it all on the line, I've never seen a moment. Mm-hmm. And so this divide between the people and our leaders is not sustainable. And I don't know what we'll do about it, but the disgust and disappointment, it's not just in this room, it's in every country in the world. I saw an expert estimated that nearly 1 billion people had protested, marched, demonstrated, or spoken out in some kind of way. 1 billion people, but no intervention. And so it's a unique kind of cruelty to see that, but then the conditions on the ground not change at all.
And I'll come back to that point, because
Sure,
I think what you're touching on here is a disconnect, and as we mentioned there, the decrease in trust in international law and international organizations and governance. I want to move on to Zeena, and as an Arab Palestinian living in the United States and someone who has also a platform with a wide audience, what is it that drives you when you are somebody who ultimately is an ancestor of those who've been kicked out of their homes, right? The balance between the despair that many Palestinians will feel, well, you know, this is another Nakba. This time the difference is it's being live streamed, so there's actually no excuse, as opposed to 75 years ago where people could have said, you know, well, no one heard about it until it happened. So how do you balance between that and wanting to continue giving a voice and trying to make yourself believe that you're making a difference through your platform?
First of all, as a Palestinian, you can't make a choice to speak about Palestine. You're born to speak about Palestine. I remember that being the message from my grandmother when we were little kids, that they told us that we need to carry the cause with us and we need to be the ones that tell the stories about what happened to them. And the thing that I noticed I lived in the Middle East my whole life, and then I moved to the United States. What I've noticed is a big gap between the conversations that we have in the Middle East when it comes to the Palestinian cause and the conversations that more of like the West are having or people in the US are having. There's a huge gap of what's happening. Because if you think about it, where they're getting the information is coming from the mainstream media. And the mainstream media has been always playing the same scenario for like the past 50 years of Israel being the victim of all the struggles that they carry with them and never ever about the Palestinian struggle. So coming from that, I felt like this is where I can have a voice. This is where I can have an effective role. Because while there is many, many brilliant journalists on the ground in Gaza and Palestine in general, here in Aljazeera, everywhere in the Middle East, we're not very connected to the conversation, and we're not very involved in the conversations that are happening with the West. So I felt like I'm able to actually take the best out of, like I'm able to connect those two worlds together by what I know, what I'm witnessing, what I'm hearing from my friends in Gaza. When I see them doing their report on Aljazeera in Arabic, at the same time, I'm able to translate that and speak the truth of what I'm seeing to the West and give them a different source of information. Because in this time and day, and it's very new, but social media became a source of information for many, many people. And we need to keep working into feeding this source of information, everything that we're being told. So basically, this is the part that keeps me going every day.
So, there we saw in the introductory video there the story of a couple of Arab journalists in the West, one in Canada and I believe the other in the US, who lost their job because they spoke about Palestine. We've heard many of those stories, not just in journalism, in education, universities, in schools, children being stopped and so forth. Is that something that you've been concerned about in terms of the cancel culture that is being enforced on anybody, both whether it is on your platform itself, so having posts deleted or strikes on your accounts, or in professional career where if someone's working in a certain field, they very likely can lose their job or at least be reprimanded in one way or another for, believe it or not, calling for an end to killing children?
Well, I agree with you, and I think once you start speaking up, you're aware of the consequences, as there are consequences. But every time you engage in a conversation about Palestine or about what's happening in Gaza right now, your humanity is being cross-examined, and everyone wants to make sure that you're human and you feel pain for anybody that's suffering. But the risks are really, it's all about how much I'm empowering myself with knowledge to actually have the conversation, the difficult conversations, instead of being in a position where I'm always defending myself in a conversation and trying to prove that what I'm telling the truth or I'm trying to prove my point. I'm actually leading this conversation by speaking about the things that probably, and like assuming those are the things that they probably don't know about. This is the stuff that nobody has spoken about it with them, because I have a different definition for a lot of things that, like take Zionism for example. If I call someone a Zionist as a Palestinian, it has a whole different meaning to someone who's American. What they define being a Zionist is completely different than my definition. When we say it in a certain way, but they don't hear it the same way. So where's the disconnect? Here's where I'm not gonna come and define Zionism to you as an American in a certain way that my way. I don't want to convince you about my way. I want to tell you what is wrong with your definition. Mm-hmm. I want to tell you that your feeling of and that what you think is giving you the right to a home in Palestine means the displacement of my people, means the killing of our children, our women, and our men. So I don't want to change your definition, but I want to tell you what your definition means to us.
So on that idea of narratives and correcting narratives, Ahmad, your platform is one that is used to maybe counter some of the false propaganda that's there. And Zeena mentioned something there about how many people now get their news or information not through traditional platforms as they did in the past, news channels or newspapers and so forth. They do get them through accounts that they follow on social media. They get them through the WhatsApp videos that people share. They get them through those digital platforms. Tell me a bit about your experience in that and how you are able to counter certain narratives, how much work it takes into it. Does it really have that impact? And what kind of resources maybe it requires? Because we are at an age where, as ghastly and murderous as the war on the ground is, the war of minds is just as fierce, albeit obviously less bloody, but the consequences of which are what allow for the genocide to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. The information war is very, very important. For me, I was a Palestine organizer in college, and so I was very used to debating Zionists on talking points, and we're always debating our perception of reality. And so for me, it wasn't too difficult to pick apart some of their talking points, but I did have to obviously do some research, and I had to do research in real time, getting bombarded with propaganda, essentially. And of course, I'm not the investigative journalist, right? I take the work of people like Ali Abu Nima and Max Blumenthal. They do the investigative journalism. I just would read their articles, try to digest their information, and then communicate it to the public in the way that I guess is unique to myself, right? I would say that the effect it's important, the work that's being done. So for me, before all this happened, I had no followers. I had maybe 150 followers. Now I have, across different platforms, several 100,000 followers. So I think people were just hungry for this information. They wanted to know the truth of what happened. And there's two examples I want to use. One, I got a DM from a random person. This was your average white American, and they said that the content I created not only educated them, but they were able to take that information and share it with people they know that are completely ignorant on the situation, and it opened their eyes. And then I got tagged on Instagram, and this was an Israeli influencer with like 100,000 followers. They tagged me on Instagram in the comment section of another Israeli Zionist influencer, Yusuf Haddad. This guy has several 100,000 followers. And they were weaponizing the social media reporting system, right? So they were trying to identify and target content creators that were countering, I guess, their narrative, and they wanted to drive traffic to that person's content or their profile, mass report them for hate speech so they get taken down. So she tagged me, and I thought it was an interesting comment, so I was reading everything she had to say. And what she said was, this person, Ahmad, has created content exposing what happened on October 7th. The damage he has done to the narrative is irreparable. So, and I'm not taking credit for that, of course. That's the investigative journalism, right, done by Max Blumenthal and Ali Abu Nima and others. But I felt the work needed to be done, and so that was my personal experience with it.
So you said something there about maybe the huge increase in followers is a reflection of the hunger for, or the vacuum for, an alternative narrative, right? And we've seen that ultimately speaking, the overall narrative that has been presented with regards to the occupation of Palestine over decades has been one that has been firmly in favor of the occupation. And when there has been small margins that have been afforded to the Palestinian side, they haven't been done or given the same amount of resources in the past. Now with social media and with digital platforms, there seems to be more of a level playing field, albeit there is still that threat of shadow banning and so forth. And here, this is what I want to ask about. Like, when you come to put these videos together and you're trying to spread that message, the main challenges that you would face, do you just do it and kind of like hit see how it goes? Or are you looking at specific trajectories of engagement? Or are you looking at how do I kind of cheat an algorithm that's there? Or do you have like a specific, in terms of how it is? Because I know there are people who will be watching and hearing and who do want to use their platform or their voice, no matter small or big, who will want to figure out ways to counter what is an onslaught of false narrative that's being pushed, whether it's about rape or beheaded babies or other things like that.
So the nature of the censorship has evolved, and so I can't really give any specific advice that I think can help someone now because it's changing in real time. But at the beginning, because now we're 60 days in, right? At the very beginning, what I found was helpful on the subtitles, the captions, I would add a lot of asterisks, and I would bleep myself. Whenever I said the word Hamas, I would say hummus. And I just tried to censor myself while still trying to communicate the information. And actually, a lot of viewers commented, they said, this is really annoying. Like, I enjoyed the video and it's very informational, but I felt like you just put a bunch of speed bumps in the content for me. But I had no choice. I didn't know any other way to get the content across without it getting taken down. So I saw the other day something that I found interesting. There was this girl on TikTok, and she used code words for everything. So she gave Palestine a new name, she gave Israel a new name, she gave everything a new name. And because of the context, obviously, the viewer is able to determine the meaning of those words. And so I thought that was interesting, and I think that might be something that I try, and maybe others might want to as well.
Yes. All right, Tadhg, your content is more unique. It's, no offense, guys, more creative. You know.
We all agree with you.
Thank you for noticing.
You know. I might ask you at the end maybe to give us a little performance, but no, I want to know about both. Also, let's start with your personal story as well. I mean, you know, someone who maybe writes these sketches. Is it you on your own who writes them? Do you have somebody else who does it? What's the creative process? What made you want to use your ability to write creatively and perform these sketches for a cause that, I don't know, you tell me how linked you are to it, and what is it that drives you?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for the welcome that I received tonight coming in here. Like, I've never had such a life-affirming welcome, I don't think, in my life, and certainly not in my career. And it really means a lot to us as creators as well, I think, to get that reciprocation, because it can feel, I'm not comparing myself to the loneliness of being Palestinian for all this time, but sometimes it can feel lonely as an advocate as well when you get it like backlash from officialdom in your own country. So I was very moved by it, and thank you. The reasoning for doing it, I suppose, is I have many friends, and I am myself an Irish Republican, and I would be very proud to say that. I believed in Ireland's right to resist occupation and still believe in that by whatever means necessary in accordance with international law. That can sometimes be a controversial thing to say, but it's based on international law. So I have always seen the struggle that my friends in the north endured and the Palestinian struggle as being the same. It's an anti-colonial struggle, and you know, Ireland and Palestine identifies itself along the same lines of the oppression in terms of being labelled terrorists for resisting the dehumanization, all the mechanisms of colonialism we identify with. But aside from that, I just feel like it's the right thing to do. I remember speaking to Gerry Adams one time, who maybe people will know as the president of Sinn Féin in Ireland, and I asked him in a podcast, you know, when things were at their most difficult in the 70s and 80s and through the whole struggle, how did you persist? Why did you persist? And he said, because I knew we were right. Mm-hmm. And that's the way I feel about the Palestinian struggle, that I feel like it's simply right to stand up for the oppressed. It is simply the right thing to do. So to come on to the work, I have always done political satire, I suppose. I sometimes pivot to other types of comedy, but a little bit like what Shaun was saying, when this happened, I had done some sketches about Palestine before, and I just waited, I think, a few days. It didn't feel like it was right to do comedy straight away. You know, I was just trying to get a sense of, I suppose what I'm doing is not straight up comedy anyway, it's satire, it's just looking at the propaganda and trying to find creative ways to debunk it, I suppose. But to answer your question, what I try to do with my work is to listen to the propaganda, the different parts of it playing out in my head, and then I think to myself, well, what's a decent analogy for that? That would be the most straightforward way for my friends who are not that politically engaged to get it. So if Palestine and Israel was a housing dispute, yes, and there was a guy who used to live in a house, and then one day this other guy called to his house and said, actually, this is my house, because it says it in this book, and you have to move into the shed. And in that simple way of just analogizing it, I suppose, I feel like I can get the message out there without, like, I admire what these guys are doing because they're actually dealing with the nuts and bolts of it. They're talking about the massacres. They're talking about the facts and figures of it. What I'm doing is much easier. I'm just doing a storybook version of it that a 5-year-old hopefully could understand. But I suppose the beauty of satire, to finish up, is that, you know, one of the strongest tools that the Zionists have in their propaganda arsenal, in my opinion, is that they tell people like me that it's too complicated for me to understand. I would never understand this conflict. And the British did the same thing with Ireland, did the same thing with India. You know, I think the strength of satire is that it shows this isn't complicated at all. In fact, genocide and ethnic cleansing should never be a complicated thing for anyone to understand. That's right. So the last thing I'd like to say on that is I think hopefully what the satire does as well is if you get the analogy and you understand the analogy, then you're left with a choice. So you can either change your way of looking at things or you can continue to support something that is by definition genocidal and racist. And it's your choice as an audience.
So you touched on that. That video was actually maybe the first video I saw of yours about the analogy of the housing dispute, right? And it's not, you know, I wouldn't see it as a reductionist kind of way. It is a simple kind of bite-sized way of trying to understand the essence, right? And this is maybe, I'll tell you as somebody who's a journalist, you know, when we get into discussions, for many people their clock started on October 7th, right? The truth is the world existed before that and atrocities began before that. So that was a good kind of video and it's something that actually helps a lot, and I'll tell you it is something that has that impact. But how else then do you pick different topics? Like where you're saying as somebody, for example, yes, you sympathize as a Republican, as coming from a country that has struggled for its own liberation, but maybe not necessarily somebody who's into the nuts and bolts of Palestinian politics or what is going on. So how do you identify where you believe the most gross disinformation campaigns are taking place? And today I'm going to do a video about that topic or that angle.
I think I'm doing similar to what these guys are doing, just in a different way. So if I see something on the television and if I make the mistake of watching mainstream media for 5 minutes and you get a propagandist talking point, then instead of getting angry and throwing something at the TV, I think to myself, okay, how could I creatively show that this is dishonest? You know, because that's what it is. It's dishonest. I mean, that's what propaganda is, effectively. Like, it's a version of lying. So usually I'll think of what the particular item is, and then what way how would you analyze, create an analogy for this? Is it a school fight? Is it you know, so it'll always come with the injustice or the propaganda first, and then I'll think what's a potentially clever way of making everyone understand that. Because I think there's a real, I don't know if people on the panel agree, but there's a real exceptionalism around Palestine. You know, you get people who've made a name for themselves in social media being anti-racists, you know, and being, you know, campaigning for different items online, and then are completely quiet about Palestine. You know, so it's extraordinary. You know, I have lots of people in Ireland who, as Shaun was saying, they've been on marches for other causes, and they're just quiet. And Ireland is seen as an outlier, but we still have people in Ireland that's like, I'm not sure about Palestine. So that's where I feel I can make a difference if you can create a video to kind of go, no, this is this is not just an international struggle, it's a struggle for humanity.
So on that, let's pick up on that. I think, there is definitely an exceptionalism when it comes to Palestine. There is a double standards that we see in many different aspects, whether it's on through organizations, media institutions, individuals, and so forth. Part of that could be intentional, but part of that I would propose, and let's hear what your thoughts on everyone, all of you is on this, is that it is a result and consequence of decades long of social conditioning and indoctrination, right? When you have been told constantly that these are terrorists, or when you have been told constantly that somehow those who have suffered atrocities in Europe, the people in Palestine must pay for something they didn't commit by giving their land to them, or when you have been told that, everything that is coming out of the mouths of the Arabs or the Palestinians is a lie, and actually, these who we can relate to more because they look like us and so forth is better. That is, it is understandable why your average person will not want to believe their eyes, even though seeing it, right? So how do you counter that? How do you counter 7 decades, if not longer, of social conditioning on all levels that has happened to try and actually show the reality of what's happening?
I think in 70 days, we have erased decades of that social conditioning. It's one of the few things that has left me encouraged. I would say it like this. I think the IQ of the world on Gaza, the West Bank, Palestinian issues, the formation of the Israeli project, the whole world, which I think knew very, very little about this, now understands way more than they did. Not only that, because the mainstream media, particularly in the United States and throughout Europe, has failed to tell the story of Palestinians, it has given Palestinians an opportunity to tell the story themselves on Instagram, on TikTok, on Twitter, on Facebook. And what it has done, it has countered the stereotypes in profound ways. Millions of people are obsessed with a Palestinian grandfather named Khalid. The grandfather, the soul of his soul, Reem. I've seen my mother, who is a 70-year-old white woman, ask me, how is Khalid doing? I have become friends with a young journalist in Gaza named Ahmed. We've been trying to get Khalid an Instagram account. But everything about him, he is a walking counter to every lie ever told about Palestinian men. The man is the embodiment of not just peace. He has an aura that has stopped people in their tracks. Not only as they see him lovingly care for his grandchildren and comb Reem's hair and say he knew the way she loved it. And very few men know how to do their daughter's hair. And you saw, I cried for days as I watched, I could cry now, as I watched Khalid try to open her eyes. And then the next day he was interviewed and he said, I thought there was a chance that maybe she was just asleep. And as we watched it and saw a man with a full beard and turban who has been used to demonize Muslims and Arabs in every action movie ever made, as we saw a man that resembled the enemy in every mainstream action movie from the past 30 years, instead have a peace, a depth. It was clear Khalid alone was stronger than the propaganda machine of Israel. Just him, all by himself. There is no lie. There is no lie that the American media or Israel could ever tell that would be stronger than Khalid. But it's not just him. I could tell 1,000 stories. And so the world has been able to see for themselves, to see one of the leading journalists of the region, the bureau chief of Aljazeera in Gaza, learn that his entire family had been killed, and see him not shed a tear, but instead look into the camera and speak of God's will, to speak of how what has just happened to him moments ago makes him no different than every Gazan who has experienced that. And you see this and you realize that the world is seeing in real time the lies they were told, particularly about Muslim men, Arab men, have been proven so demonstrably false that I don't know we could ever put that back in the box. I don't know that that lie will ever be told in a way that will resonate because of what we've seen. And so, yes, the conditioning that has happened for generations, for decades, is profound. But because Palestinians were shut out of so much mainstream media, it forced primarily, I call them kids because many of the young journalists in Gaza are literally, my oldest two daughters are 22 and 24. Most of these young journalists are children. They're 20, 21, 22, who are forcing the world to see them, to understand them. And so now, I have people who are so obsessed with Palestinians in Gaza that they follow, that if those Palestinians don't post every 4 or 5 hours, they begin to panic and wonder, is my new favorite person that I pray for, that I cry for, that I wonder about, is she okay? I saw a young woman named Bisan that I have grown to just love and admire. She said something that devastated me. She said for 60 days, she had kept her 3 cats alive. And she had left her cats in her home only on day 60 for her home to be bombed and her cats to be killed. And I've never cried over cats. I don't even like cats. But how hard must it have been to keep 3 cats alive for 60 days in the apocalypse? And yet she had done it. And I saw nearly 1 million people that interacted with her post and grieved with her and said, Bisan, I'm sorry about your cats. And I did a simple survey and asked my followers, how many of you know a Palestinian by name? And almost 95% of my followers now know someone in Gaza by name. That is a earth-shattering shift from where we were on October the 6th, that now it's not a news story, it's not a link to click on, but there is a person that you know and love and care about. And that does not make someone Palestinian, but it makes it real in a way that is real for almost everyone here, but now it's real for people all over the world. And that is something that no propaganda machine ever could create.
I think and you're right. I mean, you know, the idea is that Palestinians and those who care about what is happening, they're not looking for people to be Palestinians, they're just looking for them to be human.
That's right, that's right.
And this, on this point, Zeena, the idea we were talking about, social conditioning and the dehumanization of Palestinians, or at least the idea of park it over there, it's something complicated, we don't need to know about it, or don't give me a headache, or there is even, you know, with those who started even to try and show maybe some sympathy in the beginning and then said, you know, they get the fatigue of what's happening, you know, are we still going to be depressed all the time? I'll tell you, especially within maybe even the Arab world, which is even more scary amongst the time, you know, no, khalas, we're not going to be depressed all the time. that kind of sentiment where society is often driven by the mass sentiments of either media or platforms. How is it that you can counter that when you either feel that people are losing interest or that you're wondering whether people are dehumanizing the people that you're trying to advocate for, or whether you feel like there needs to be some sort of a way to counter that social conditioning that we said has been going on for decades?
Basically, it is important to also mention that most Palestinians that are still in Palestine outside of Gaza are not even allowed to speak about Palestine. It is illegal to speak about what is happening to other Palestinians within the same borders. So it is a big obligation. And when you want to start these conversations and when you listen to someone using a language dehumanizing you, and they are called the leader of the free world, or they are the ones that actually hold all the keys to all this, to fix this, and they just refuse to. Instead, they continue to dehumanize you. This is when you get you feel angry. As a Palestinian, you just get angry because you just know, as a human, you will get angry knowing that. But how do you channel that anger? Where do you go with it? How do you understand that you're part of, I honestly call them a digital army. I call us a Palestinian army because Palestine doesn't have an army, and we are the Palestinian army, the displaced people, the 10 million plus displaced Palestinians that have the right to speak within countries that allow them to speak about something so important. So we keep trying to figure out the best strategies. We spent hours, at least today, and many conversations before into how do we keep the momentum? How do we not only get the sympathy when kids in Gaza are being bombed and people in Gaza are suffering from an Israeli airstrike, but how do we keep the momentum to speak about this when there is still issues that are ongoing, but the world is not looking at it? There is no attention to it. Nobody ever noticed. We keep going back and feeling like, have we done enough before this happened, this time at least? Many, many wars have happened in Gaza, but have we done enough? Have we brought attention and spoke enough about Palestine that we helped those besieged people in this small area in the world where they can barely get any electricity, any water? They need an approval to leave or to enter. It's impossible. Have we looked at them one day and decided that this is worth talking about before they were dying by the masses?
Ahmed, I wanna ask you about this idea of, again, you said before October 7th, you weren't very prominent on social media. Your content has been focused, as you say, on narrating or breaking down maybe or explaining the work of investigative journalists, ultimately looking at maybe a specific segment of society that interacts with news and trying to change how that news is. So rather than, there was the initial narrative that came out October 7th, babies were burned in ovens and beheaded and hung on clothing lines. This was happening and so forth. And there was one of your videos that came out about, who attacked and who actually shelled these houses and so forth, right? You were talking about looking at the work of investigative journalists and trying to maybe string it together and present it in a more engaging way through these videos. Do you also, whilst you're writing that, look at, for example, the language that's used by mainstream media or others that has been used, like I say, to socially conditioned people. So, die versus killed, or looking at, conflict rather than genocide or occupation, or blockade instead of siege. Is that something that you are aware of as somebody maybe who comes from a different kind of background, not necessarily a strictly journalistic one, and how that feeds into it? Or is it something that you're picking up as you go along, and how important is it, do you think, in terms of pushing that message?
It's something that I pick up as I go along. There's a lot of other people that are focusing on this, and I think it's really important. For me, I guess, I try to just defend Palestinians from the lies. That's what I'm most passionate about. I hate being lied to. I think we all do. And we know obviously why they're lying. Why would you insist babies were beheaded if they were not actually beheaded? Till this day, there are people on Twitter saying babies were beheaded, even though Israeli media has reported that this did not happen. So why do you do that? We all know why. It's because it's easier to murder someone if you can convince people they deserve it, or they are not human. So you create beasts out of Palestinians. What kind of human can pick up a baby and behead it, or bake it in an oven? And now we're hearing these stories about mass systemic rape. So what I'm most passionate about is debunking these lies. And at first, I don't even have to try and debunk it. I can just say, show us the evidence. I don't necessarily need to see a video of someone getting raped, but with these claims of rape, they aren't even firsthand testimony, which, by the way, in court, testimony, if that was the only evidence that you had, would be quite weak to begin with. But we're not even hearing firsthand from the victims. We're not even hearing secondhand. We're hearing people literally say, I heard my friend tell me that someone told him that they witnessed 5 Palestinians gang raping a woman. Well, this is complete nonsense. This is like a telephone game. So that's what I'm most passionate about, or trying to counter these lies.
So Tadhg, we spoke a little bit about the different means of delivering messages, and some obviously through performing arts or creative techniques there. And often sometimes the same way there's the saying of a picture speaks 1,000 words, there are sketches that can be as impactful, and we've seen it through Hollywood, for example, when Shaun was talking about dehumanizing Arabs through depicting them in a certain way. So acting and drama is something that is extremely effective from that perspective, right? There are those who have done sketches on many different things, particularly, by the way, for example, you're talking about like both in Ireland, the UK, Europe as well, on issues of justice causes, whether it's been immigrants and the huge backlash against immigrants and the racism that's been increased in Europe, whether it's been about, for example, the economy and the huge discrepancy between working class people who are getting poorer and the other class. But suddenly there's not that many of those creatives who are doing it about the genocide that's taking place. Why is that? Do you think it's because they're worried that they might not get hired? Do you think that it's because they just don't understand it? I don't know, the circle that you maybe speak with like-minded kind of people who, or at least those who are in your field, are those discussions, are people maybe like supportive, behind closed doors, but too scared to do it, publicly?
Definitely. I mean, I think we all are aware that if you choose to be publicly supportive of Palestine, you are taking on the strongest lobby that perhaps the world has ever seen, and it has influence everywhere. So, I love the way that Shaun keeps bringing it back to the US and Israel, because that's very important. Most of like the Irish economy, for instance, is founded on US companies. If the US pulled its companies out of Ireland, our economy would fall apart tomorrow. So you hit the nail on the head when you said there's a fear about being active in support of Palestine that I understand. There's no point in being emotional about it. I understand people have to look after their families. Like, for instance, there's friends of mine in the circle where we make sketches, and they would have a third of the following that I would have on Instagram, and they have constant paid partnerships. And their paid partnerships are with Spotify and other big brands, usually US brands or supportive brands of the Israeli regime, however tacit the support is. So that's just a fact. Nobody has ever contacted me about doing a paid partnership. I don't. Nobody wants to be associated with me.
Is anyone from Uridu or anything here?
That's actually why I'm in Qatar trying to pick up some. No, but yeah. So I suppose what I would say there is to because you get the same thing with the Irish unity debate, right? Just to bring it back to Ireland for a second, and I know it's different, but it's also kind of the same, that people don't want to be vocal about something that may appear that they're somehow supportive of terrorism. So it comes back to this thing again, it's time for a global discussion, I was saying earlier, on the whole terrorist versus freedom fighter and noble state actor. But I suppose what I would say to conclude what I'm saying is, I have found, a little bit like what Ahmad was saying, that by being authentic and actually just saying, this is how I feel about Palestine, I have some skills. I think Zeena said it as well. I didn't feel like I had any choice. I've got some sort of creative outlet. I'm passionate not just about Palestine, but I'm anti-genocide. That should never be a controversial position to hold. So I felt like it was the right thing to do, again, to do the sketches. But I would say I have benefited from being authentic. Again, my followers have exploded, and I'm getting all this love and support. And what is it to be a human being? Like, it's not all about paid partnerships with Spotify. So if there are creators out there, and obviously there'll be people in the room that will be obviously sympathetic to Palestine, but tell your friends who maybe aren't that, like, if you are authentic in the long term, you will benefit as well in terms of your career, So put your heart ahead of your head initially, and in the end you'll probably benefit in both metrics, maybe.
Thank you. So I am going to open that up to questions, but before that, I just want one last one before we do. And I think it's maybe something that's made me think, based on just what you said there. Momentum, right? Momentum is very important. This is not the first, albeit the worst it has been that we have seen, but it's not the first prolonged, excessive execution of mass killing that has been done by Israel. Right, 2008, 2012, 2014, 2020, the list goes on and much further back. During those times, there has been outrage, and there's been calls for boycott, and there has been hashtags, and there has been a lot of interaction. And then even now, in that very temporary cessation of genocide, let's call it, right, that lasted for about a week or 10 days, suddenly there was a dip in outrage, a dip in activism, a dip in anger. Here is my question now to all of you, and I think maybe I'll be a little bit blunt about it. You hold a responsibility, just as you have been talking and giving platforms throughout, that when the interest dies down, that you maintain that interest, right? How are you going to do that?
No, you're absolutely right. I feel a complete obligation, not only to my friends in Gaza and the West Bank and my Palestinian friends around the world, but I think half of the people in Jordan follow me now. And, as Tadhg said, I think I've lost about 700,000 followers, but I have 3 million new followers. And of those men and women, I met many of you. They expect this of me, and as they should. It is an obligation. I feel an obligation first and foremost as a human rights advocate, as a journalist myself, to continue speaking up. I feel an obligation as a healthy human being that's not being bombed, that's not hungry. I had breakfast, lunch, and dinner today. I feel an obligation as a person who has access to resources, who is now in a beautiful, wonderful space where there is a microscopic chance of danger for me. The security to even just get into the parking lot here was so serious that here I am, a safe, secure, whole, fed, well-resourced human being. It is my obligation as that person, whether anyone new followed me or not, that it is all of our obligation to make sure that if our Palestinian sisters and brothers in Gaza and the West Bank and around the world who are hurting, it is our obligation to stand when they can't stand, to hold them up when they feel like falling down. Zainab and I, we were over here crying just as the video showed. It is such a horrible, painful moment that I have to remind myself, as painful as it is for me, what must it feel like to attempt to try to sleep anywhere in Gaza tonight? And if I am tired, and many of you tell me daily, so many of you told me today, Shaun, you DM'd me or you pinned my comment. What I hear all the time is how tired you are, how little sleep you're getting, because you feel guilty even not watching, not bearing witness. So as our friends, particularly in Gaza, as their energy wanes, I have a friend named Kuta in North Gaza who sent me a video today, and I was in my hotel room, and I found myself full of rage. I literally found myself, this is not something I do, I found myself like punching the air. He sent me a video of him and several other young men getting buckets and buckets of water from the sea to drink. And he showed me them, you can't boil seawater enough to make it drinkable. But he had nothing to drink. It is an age-old story of thirst. If you are thirsty enough and you're near the ocean, your brain will tell you, drink this water. They can't even leave. They can't cross over new barriers and zones that have been created. He deserves for me to do whatever I need to do to stay healthy and whole, to help keep that momentum. We must, all of us must, whatever that means. If it means me, this is the first time I have left my family. I have a young family with kids. My wife is slightly irritated with me having left and made this trip because it puts an enormous burden on her. I am scrambling to do anything I can to try to keep this momentum. We have to do it tomorrow. We have to do it next week. And we have to do it, sadly, Israel has already, they have already publicly stated that they at least plan on doing this for another month and a half. How? And so, if it ended in a month and a half, we would be talking about the single most destructive place on earth, where already almost 90% of all Gazans are currently homeless. What are we talking about? So whatever momentum we have today, we're not even talking about keeping it for a month and a half. We have to begin to prepare our hearts, our minds, our souls. We have to begin to encourage one another that this is going to be years long. Palestinians will then grab me by the hand and say, Shaun, you now are experiencing just a tiny fraction of what my people have dealt with for 75 years. And so I am a welcome guest, and it is my obligation to be as energetic as I can for as long as I can.
Until the end of the occupation. Zeena, we've seen a sizable amount of participation when it's come to boycotting, right? We've seen it before in other instances throughout, but maybe this has been one of the biggest. We've seen some figures with regards to, for example, how much loss companies like Starbucks have made and others, right? And this is also about the momentum, because the momentum is not just about awareness. The momentum is about ensuring that a price is exerted on those who support genocide or those who support apartheid, right? So here, on that, based on that, in terms of not just keeping awareness of, not just keeping momentum of awareness, but keeping momentum up of activism, of actually people translating that awareness into something that is tangible and actionable. What are you going to do about that, or where do you view the role of people like yourself to push that?
So this is very important to talk about, because basically, when we're talking about keeping the momentum, one of the biggest fears that people that live in Gaza have is they always keep asking, have you gotten used to what you're seeing? Did you get used to it? Did you get used to all the footage that we're sending you? Because they are always worried that we're going to be just okay with what's happening. Our brains are gonna like adapt into accepting what's going on and move on. So that's their fear. And that should scare us, because if we are not, I'm not saying we should keep looking at every single image and cry for hours every day. I'm just saying, when we look at that image and when we see what is happening, what is our next step? Like, we should put a list of things that we're doing and check off of one of those things. Have I talked about Palestine today? Have I posted about it? Did I go to a demonstration? Did I boycott? Did I donate? Which one did I do? Did I engage in a conversation, maybe offline? If I have done nothing from that list, then I should be ashamed of myself. And when I say that, I focus because I live in the United States, and over 30-something states, boycott is illegal. We're not allowed. You're not allowed to talk about it. I'm lucky that I live in a state where you're allowed to speak about it, and people are very vocal about it. When it comes to, boycott like certain brands and see how it's happening. But I think the issue is we got to more than 30 states already that doesn't allow you to boycott. So now we have to go back to the point where we need to change that. We need to be able to let people boycott. And that just takes us to, again, the same thing that we talked about. In the past few years, they have managed to work so hard on this that we got here today. And when I come and tell someone in a certain state, you should boycott today, I am legally in trouble. I'm not allowed to talk about it. So it's kind of like a scaring tactic. It just have like that chilling effect where you don't want to speak about it. But if you can't speak about it, which you're all privileged in like, let's say in Qatar, you're all privileged that you are able to speak openly about this. You're privileged. Then you should actually lead this and help us lead like other countries to be where you are here, to be in the same place where you can openly call it an illegal occupation without being labeled as a terrorist supporter, be able to be in the streets without being scared that someone will shoot you just because you're wearing your kufiya or you're trying to show solidarity to your people. We should all work together. We should all make sure that we get there where we need to be, because we are so behind. We are years and years behind, and they've been working nonstop. In the meantime, we were trying to survive. In the meantime, we were hurting. In the meantime, they were exhausting us with what the crimes they're doing in the West Bank, the crimes they're doing in Jerusalem. Like, how many of us, probably, I don't know, how many of you already know that people haven't been able to enter Al-Aqsa since the beginning, since October 7th? Like, nobody has discussed it. There's so many things that they do on a daily basis that we just need to just keep going. We just need to check our list, put down that list, and check which one have you done today. That's what I think.
So maybe to reduce the impact of each blow that comes, if we look at it as a almost annual situation where Israel will commit a specific crime, so whether it was, for example, Sheikh Jarrah, or whether it is the constant wars in Gaza, or even in Lebanon, or even in Syria and bombing there, between each one of those, it is that attempt to maintain awareness and conversation to make it maybe at least a little bit more difficult for the next one to happen, or at least a little more difficult for it to be as bad. And part of that is that information, correcting the narrative, right? You can get away with things when people think you're the good guy, and then slowly when they start realizing. And here, this is the thing where I want to touch on with you here, Ahmed, is once this is, inshallah, over, the sooner as soon as it can be, there is a narrative that needs to be discussed, which is about, for example, the right to resistance, that is about the right of return, that is about things that are the underlying problems of why we are here today. They are the root cause. Essentially, they are what colonialism has left behind purposefully to ensure that this goes on as long. So have you ever thought about what kind of content or what kind of narratives you want to be pushing through your platform in the medium or long term?
Yeah, you mentioned the right to resistance, and I think that's very, very important. Obviously, Israel has punished the people of Palestine in many different ways, and they've committed horrific crimes, but this is the worst, right, since the Nakba, really. And it's happening because Palestinians decided to carry out an act of resistance. Now, Hamas did carry out some war crimes. Unfortunately, certain soldiers did kill civilians, but not to the extent that Israel is lying about. They are deliberately trying to make dirty what they did. The majority of what Hamas did, the majority of what Palestinians did on October 7th was targeted at the Israeli military. It was a very sophisticated, strategic attack. They were very disciplined, and it was a military raid, really. These soldiers went in expecting not to come home. They didn't know if they were going to make it. But they raided these military bases, they wiped the floor with the occupation soldiers, and they destroyed parts of the military bases. And this was a humiliating event for Israel to experience. These are people in a concentration camp, living in tunnels. They can't even communicate over the phone because everything is monitored. There are drones flying 24/7. They have satellites that can see through the clouds. If it's a rainy, cloudy day, they can still see. These are the biggest underdogs in history, and they still decided, even though it could mean our death and our punishment, we're going to carry out this right to resistance anyway, because it's our right as human beings. We are not going to be subjected to this treatment forever. So, for me, what I intend to do is continue to educate people about the truth of what happened on that day. And I don't want to make it seem like I'm trying to clean up what they did. Obviously, there was some violence that we all don't want to see. We all condemn the violence. We don't want to see it. But we have to be honest about what happened. The Palestinians are only communicated to with violence. So they decided to talk back to their oppressor with the language they speak best, which is violence. Okay, well, I was getting a bit loud, so I should calm down. But yeah, we need to, I think, insist on the Palestinian right to resist, and I think use this opportunity to educate people about all the context which the media is trying to deny, and now even social media platforms are trying to deny. Because when you provide this context, they say you're supporting terrorism.
Very quickly, if you can just touching on the point of that momentum, and then afterwards we are going to take some questions. So those who want to ask questions, just put your hands up, and there are mics, I believe, that will be going around. They'll find their way, but very, very quickly take it. Like I say, momentum and ensuring that there is that constant awareness, that it only increases, doesn't plateau, it doesn't decrease. What are your views with regards to that?
Yeah, I'll just quickly say that just like this nightmare didn't start on October 7th, it doesn't end with the ceasefire that we all hope will come soon, of course, and that's the priority, but the root causes are the most important thing, and Palestinian statehood and independence is something that we who believe in the cause need to pursue that indefinitely until we get there. I would say that in the Irish experience, you know, right now in Ireland, there's relative peace in the north of Ireland, and we're looking at a border poll to unite Ireland within about 10 years. If you'd have said that to somebody even a matter of a few years ago, it would have been laughed at. So there is hope, and from a personal point of view, I have already got sketches in mind around the time that a ceasefire would happen, and some people would have the perspective that because we now have a ceasefire, it's somehow over and we can forget about it. I already have a type of satire in mind for that, again, that unless you look at those root causes, you're setting yourself up for this unfortunate, horrific event to just be part of the same pattern, that it will happen again and again and again and again, because as long as you have oppression, you will always have resistance. That's a tale as old as time itself. Thank you.
All right. We'll take some questions, maybe 3 or 4 at a time. I have one here at the front, please. I'll try and go like section, and we'll go around. Go ahead. Mohammed, تفضل. If you could just introduce yourself very quickly and...
Sure. I'm Mohammed from Gaza. I think that's enough introduction. But thanks so much for this amazing panel. That was really brilliant. I want to make 2 quick points, personal observations. Number one, there's really government and pro-Israeli organizations are pouring an enormous amount of resources into a gaslighting campaign. Yet they are being beaten up by a few dozen volunteers putting all their time on Twitter, Instagram, on social media, and they can't beat them up. It's quite remarkable. I've never seen anything like that. And I'm intimately familiar with how much money and effort the Israeli government is pouring in. And to be beaten up by just us people, volunteers, and social media is incredible. But there's one of the main reasons for that is that Israel has moved way far to the right, that it has become incapable of making any sympathetic speech to the Palestinians because it would have a huge political cost back at home. So cruelty has become a point. And the way that it works is to deflect from that cruelty by showing something allegedly more cruel that the Palestinians have done. The other point is that it's very important not to talk about Gaza in terms of binaries. It's people in Gaza are not heroes and are not victims. The situation, Gaza is not a shithole, not a luxury brand. It's somewhere in between. It's very complicated. And sharing the graphic details of what's happening there, that's important. We've seen also a campaign in Israel as well in that regard, but to just humanize people in Gaza as much as possible. So my friend Rifat al-Arair was assassinated a few days ago in his home, a targeted bombing in his home. And one of the first things that crossed my mind to write about him, I was shaking and crying, not believing that he died, was basically that he loved Harry Potter. He loved deep dish Chicago pizza, classic music. He taught Malcolm X and Shakespeare. And I see that largely absent in pro-Palestinian advocacy, and I see a lot of these binaries that are important to avoid. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll go in the middle, and then I'll come to, there's just here, and then Hamad, please. But if you can stand up, please. Here, if someone can.
That was a long trip. This is Lama. I am a Palestinian in the diaspora, specifically USA. Been living in Qatar for 10 years. I have to say that Qatar is the best country to be in when you see this cruelty going around. I'm Palestinian Jordanian, of course. I have to say that today, when I look at the news in USA specifically and see CNN sometimes put some posts about that Palestinians, I can't even say it because they were always biased to the other part, which is Israel. Now to see them today, at least showing part, even if it's 1%, this is an improvement for USA. USA, I remember 20 years ago, I lived there for 20 years. It was the land of freedom, the liberty. I was able there to talk about the politics of the Middle East, but not allowed in my own country. But the irony is that today it's the opposite. We are in Qatar, more freedom than USA. How ironic is this? Today, boycott you're not allowed to talk about. You're not allowed to talk about anything about Israel. We can't call them Zionists, although they are calling themselves Israeli Zionist or Zionism regime. And this is so painful. And the pain that Palestinians usually feel in the diaspora, that they always have to defend Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims, Christians in the East. So I spent 20 years in the States just defending those...
Can we, sorry to interrupt, but do try
yes.
and keep it, because I know there's a lot of people.
Yeah. Just my question today, and there's just one thing to say, that humanity cannot be applied selectively. And this is what the West is trying to do, and this has to be stopped. Because we're humans. We saw a couple of months ago, 24 months, what happened in Ukraine and Russia. And today, when it comes to Palestine, it's the other way around. My question for you, Shaun, sorry, I'm very emotional, but my question for you, sorry I didn't know you before, now we know you, and all of the rest. Thank you very much for at least standing for us. My question, how are you allowed to post your posts? Because when I try to repost your post, they don't allow me. So how can you post?
Give her your password.
So
we'll take a couple more and then let's take them in a group.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, we'll take a couple more and then.
We'll get to your question. We'll take a couple questions.
Yeah. We'll take. Hamad, it's okay.
Hi, my name is Hamad Al-Ammari, comedian and other things. Tadhg, welcome to Doha, buddy. I grew up in Dublin, so good man. Tom, we'll chat later. But a part of that is one thing America did was export the culture, the entertainment, and growing up abroad when I was younger, I was a victim of the propaganda. When we were sent to come back to Qatar and with my family to come back, I asked my dad, why in God's name are you taking us back to the Taliban? Came here, no Taliban in that sense.
At that time.
Well, not a lot of people knew about it, but anyway. I feel like we're talking to ourselves because there is a lot of irony in the fact that I'm here now talking about Palestine and talking about where we are and who we can talk to, but it feels like they're just pulling us all together in one little group with social media blocking everything. So how much of it is actually getting across? How much of it is not? There's no conversation still. I felt like when I was there, younger, there was no conversation. You come over here, you're older, you have a bit of power to speak, and you still feel like you're not part of a conversation. This is never going to be a conversation. It's one side bashing the other with complete impunity. There's no problem with it at all. And as soon as this other side, so Shaun, you say you gain more followers from this region, those followers may not be the ones that can drive that change that's necessary, needed when the money and the tax and the government structure that is coming across is paraded on CNN, BBC, all of these other news media outlets with the President of the United States saying we need extra money to give to Ukraine and Israel. And we're sitting here going, okay, they're just going to give these governments more money. And that money is coming from tax dollars of the U.S. people, some of them originally Palestinian. So for me, that's like an added insult to injury. So where is the change really going to come from when this is the continued narrative?
So a couple of things there. One, in terms of getting over either shadow bans or some of the things that prevent us from sharing, and I believe the second point being made here about conversations versus just two sides in different silos, either speaking within echo chambers or attacking each other, right? So I guess the first one was directed to you, and the second, sure, for those who want to.
So regarding my Instagram account, and I know enough even about the Instagram account of my panelists and so many others. So every day I have attorneys that are in constant legal battles with Meta and Facebook and Instagram just to keep my account open. I have had 12 different false fact checks placed on my page. And each time they said that I had posted false information, we went through a complicated review and rebuttal process and got all 12 of those false fact checks removed. And so it's exhausting. And so that we don't just get to advocate, we have to advocate and defend ourselves just to keep our platform open. But I haven't been public about any of the success that they've had at shadow banning my account. Like I've tried to I didn't want to give anyone any satisfaction of knowing that anything they had done had worked. So I just kept I kept those battles and those things to my chest. I got permanently banned from TikTok. I opened up an account on Monday. I was permanently banned on Wednesday. And like I think I only had like 3,000 followers. It's like, well, why ban a man with 3,000 followers? But clearly they were already looking for something that I had said or done. It's frustrating, but all of us, and I'm in communication with all of my panelists here, we're all dealing with it. And I do think that there is a fear on Meta, Facebook, Instagram's part that if they remove my account, that the backlash will be so severe. So it's peculiar that I will post, I see it every day. I will post something, they'll let me post it, but then you or millions of other people will repost it and get a warning for it. And so I told my panelists, my attorneys and I, we demanded basic answers from Facebook. Explain this to us. Show us your policies that you say we're violating. We've got no clarity, no answers. And so as some of my panelists said, the rules are changing day by day. They're moving, as we would say in America, moving the goalpost, every day, where we think we are operating within the lines, only to find out that we aren't. While I was here in Doha, Meta wrote me and apologized for something they removed, and they blamed it on AI. I have a feeling that that's going to become a very convenient excuse. It wasn't me, it was the computer that did it. And who made the computer? Who programmed the computer? And so this is going to be, I think, a constant battle. My educated guess is that it will get worse. We've been, as was just said, we've been so effective as volunteers on free platforms. We're not paying for ads or anything. We're winging it. We've been so effective that, of course, Israel has now had almost 70 days to figure out how do we make sure that this doesn't continue to be effective. I don't think they can stop it. If you stop me, someone else will come up. Yeah.
Well, in terms of discussions, or lack of discussions, or the lack of a middle ground, so to speak, or a place that collects for people on different sides. Is that what you're touching upon there?
It's
Mm-hmm.
not just me. Not just me. I'm a tiny bridge.
Working, living, making a great living. When this issue comes up, they say, I believe the President of the United States.
Well,
do you know what I mean?
I understand. I mentioned, that's specifically why I mentioned him, because you would assume that when the President of the country that you live in speaks, he is speaking the truth. And unfortunately, the White House have, throughout the years, we're talking about, like, when the war in Iraq happened, like until this day, they have found in an investigation over 935 lies were fabricated by the White House. And the media was complicit in these lies to justify the war in Iraq. This is the same White House, just a different owner, The thing is, like, at this time, that was a conversation I was having with many journalists and content creators and influencers, because it was true. Some of my friends will make viral content in the Middle East. They'll have millions of views on a video, and I won't see it. And I'll be like, can you send it to me? I'm just going to tell you this. We see, there's little content that comes our way, like from Aljazeera. We have to go in and look for it. Some content, I have proved, like I've sent some of my friends and my sisters, I'm like, share these posts. They don't show up on my, it's weird. They just don't show up. If she sends me a screenshot, it will look different for me. So there's a reason for that, right? And the reason is to keep those two worlds separate, to keep those two stories separate. So people there, they will hear a different story than what we're saying over here. And we are overcoming that by speaking up. The one thing that we should just focus on, because it's important for us to know, like, when we're speaking to a whole nation that can't relate to our pain, they're not worried about being displaced. They're not worried about being held in like administrative detention. Those people, if you get like if you get arrested and you don't get your call, or someone forgets to hear your rights, you're just free to go. You know, depends, right? But they can't relate to these things. So I remember in the beginning when I made like I was one of like in the beginning I started talking about it, and I had like someone was like, seriously, you're discussing U.S. tax dollars to people? I'm like, you'll see that will stick with them, because they have major debts when it comes to student loans, major debts when it comes like they have a terrible like medical care system, and there's terrible housing, there's homelessness, and they have been putting billions and hundreds of billions of dollars every single year for years now. This is not new. Did not just start to fund a military, an illegal occupation, while they're letting their people start. So when you start the conversation in a different way, maybe it's not the most traditional way. Maybe I'm not speaking about the stories that really like affect me. Maybe I'm not mentioning Yusuf, who actually looks like my son, who like put me in bed like for a week just thinking about him. But I'm speaking to them in their language, and that's not English. It's a language that they might understand. And that's what we need to do. We need to find that language. But we have broken that, I would say, a veil. We've broken that veil.
I think something good that might come from this situation is the fact that the Zionists are revealing how much power they have. Because a trick to maintaining power is hiding that you have it in the first place. But Palestine is forcing these people to expose themselves. And it's becoming more than just human rights for Palestinians. It's becoming an issue of free speech. On college campuses now, you have very privileged Ivy League Jewish Zionist students who are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to go to this school. They're the safest, most privileged people in the country. And because pro-Palestine supporters are saying, from the river to the sea, Israel's an apartheid state, stop the genocide, they're saying, we don't feel safe, this is anti-Semitism, and they're trying to conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. And now they're trying to get these groups banned, and they're even getting university presidents fired. So it's become a free speech issue, and Americans are saying, well, this is weird. How do you have the power to get a university president fired? Why are you affecting our rights of free speech? And then people are now paying attention to social media censorship. They're seeing Republican candidates for president on a debate stage, and they're all groveling and begging for, Israeli support or Zionist support, and Americans are waking up. There's a very fierce debate taking place on social media, and I think this is a good thing. I think people need to see how much power these people have and what they're willing to do with that power. They're trying to censor, they're trying to change American values, right? Constitutional rights. They're trying to affect other Americans' right to free speech. Why? So they can cover the fact that they're committing genocide. So I think this is something that will have a long-term effect in the country and hopefully produce some change.
All right. We'll take some more questions. Let's go maybe to the... Go on. I actually can't see with the lights, so we'll go and then we'll... I don't know where that's going.
Yeah.
You can ask in Arabic. Shaun. بس يسأل and then بجيكي.
I'm a student. I'm in grade 10. I'm 16 years old. I had this question.
No one ever clapped for me when I was in... Like that's a big...
I actually have this question since yesterday, because yesterday was the 75th anniversary of the establishment of the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights. I saw one of their important articles and compared it in the War of Palestine. One of them, Article 15, the right to live safely in your land in peace, which guarantees the right of food, shelter, and a life free from violence. I mean, Bin Ghafir himself, he said that the Palestinians are human animals. He said it very openly. And the other article, Article 26, that says that requires that everyone has the right to education. I mean, how many schools right now have been blown up? One of them, Al Barouk School airstrike. We have the Islamic University of Gaza. Even Al-Shifa hospital that have been bombed, and what do you call the military director himself in what do you call in Instagram. He claimed that they bombed the Shifa hospital and then taken out, and then, as he said, because of the propaganda, they made it very complicated to search for the answer. And I almost forgot about the freedom of speech that is now barely happening, where journalists are barely feeling safe. Even the horrific murder of Shireen Abu Aqla, which even happened before the catastrophic happening in the 7th of October. So my question is, isn't it all that human rights doesn't apply to all humans, especially for the Palestinians? Because since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it's almost been especially for the Palestinians, if it does apply, it's been 75 years since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and almost 75 years since the occupation of Palestine.
Can you tell me your name again, sorry?
Mohammed Al-Fatih.
Mohammed. Mohammed, next time, guys, you should have him on the panel, by the way.
Thank you.
Tadhg, I want you to answer this, if you don't mind, and then we will take a round of questions. And I think the reason why I want to hear from you here is that I think there is a parallel to a certain extent with regards to the occupation of Ireland, the struggle of Ireland, maybe the loneliness that Irish people felt at a time where people would have given their sympathy and support for other causes, but maybe not so much because of the lobby of the British, actually, and maybe other powers as well. Is there a double standard when it comes to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, when it comes to international law, the rule of international law? And what do you say, both to those who claim to be proponents of it in the West, but also to a younger generation, so as they don't lose hope in an idea that we have all tried to desperately hang on to, that maybe another world is possible?
First of all, thank you so much for your extremely articulate question. I think the Irish parallel is useful up to a point, but you know, when this horror started, an analogy I used online was if the IRA committed a campaign in England and they bombed Birmingham or Manchester or whatnot, would the British or Irish or European or world accept Britain carpet bombing Belfast? Because that's effectively a very useful analogy. And I know in my heart, and I think everyone in Britain would say straight off, no, it would never be accepted. Why? Because Irish people are white. And that's what it comes down to. And I think what this young man touches on is that when it comes to brown and black people, there's just a completely different perspective in the West. And it's not spoken about enough because there's a complete lack of understanding, acceptance, and attempts at remedying European colonialism. And it all comes back to that. There's a complete black hole of understanding and actually trying to do something to offer retribution for it. So until the West begins to have a real honest conversation about its role in colonialism and creating all the major conflicts that we've been talking about today, and obviously and specifically Palestine, we will never move beyond this situation where it's one group of people are terrorists and one group of people are sanctified by the state. So we need to have a conversation about terrorist versus freedom fighter, but we urgently need to have a conversation in the West about our racism.
Thank you. تفضل please just can I the young lady تفضل.
But you should be honest because my English is very bad. Long time I didn't speak in English. So first
tomorrow everybody will be speaking Arabic.
اولا احنا مشكله الفيديوهات عندنا اللي تطلع في الانستغرام ان عندنا مجموعه من الناس تحاول تقنع اسرائيليين في الحكومه او في الجيش ان هم على غلط. المشكله عندنا احنا نحاول نقنع شخص وهو مقتنع تماما بفكره معينه. احنا لازم نحول ونشتغل على شيء ثاني. احنا لازم نسوي المقاطعه وسويناها. وباي ذا واي احنا الحين صرنا نستغني. انتقلنا للمرحلة الثانية في قطر وصار في هاشتاج بخصوص هالموضوع. أعتقد الكل هني قاعد فإحنا نستغني. ثالث شيء بخصوص الحكومة والحكومات، أنا بجاوبك عن شيء معين. من خلال دراستي الحكومة تعمل بطريقة معينة خلف الأدوار، أوكي؟ هي لها مصالح ولها فوائد، أوكي؟ الحكومة للأسف بعد مقام الأمم المتحدة هي واقعة تحت اسمه البند السادس والبند السابع وفق الأمم المتحدة، اللي هو العقوبات الاقتصادية أو التدخل العسكري. أي دولة، وإحنا عارفين هالشيء، أي دولة خاصة عربية أو إسلامية قالت شيء أو سوت شيء بخصوص القضية الفلسطينية أو الإسلام بشكل عام، هي راح تجي عليها شيء اسمه العقوبات الاقتصادية أو التدخل العسكري. هذا شيء فهالشكل إحنا كلنا، حتى أمريكا الولايات المتحدة ملزومة أو مربوطة بشكل تخدم مصالح معينة اللي هي إسرائيل. أوكي، خلصنا من هالموضوع. فإحنا ما نقدر نلوم الحكومات مطلوب منها تحمي وطنها، تحمي حدودها الإقليمية. والحين قاعد يصير شنو السيناريو الجديد الحين اللي صاير يصير؟ الرئيس العراقي لما طلع وندد باللي صار شنو عندهم؟ تفجير في السفارة الأمريكية. السيناريو الجديد اللي الحين بيصير، الدول اللي دعمت القضية الفلسطينية وخاصة غزة بيصير فيها عمليات إرهابية، بيصير فيها اختراق، بيصير بتتعرض للعدوان يعني المشكلة عميقة جدا. أنا آسفة إني طولت، بس هذا اللي قاعد يصير. إحنا ما نبي السيناريو يتكرر، إحنا نبي نخدم القضية. وشكرا.
شكرا. I'll translate it. I'm just going to take two more and then we'll come. Can we go another few rows up just so we can, there's a hand over there somewhere. Yeah. Anyone who's got the mic, sorry? Oh, yalla, wherever you want. Just all I'm trying to do is get different areas of the crowd. So, you know, there's only one mic on one side ولا بس عندكم mic واحد؟ طيب شوفي بس. I'll leave it up to the ushers to decide.
Okay, I have the mic, thank you.
Okay, yalla.
As the only Israeli in the hall, I must tell you guys that you are making a huge difference and a huge impact. And before someone starts throwing objects at me, I am a Palestinian with an Israeli citizenship, like 2 million Palestinians who live in Israel, where the passports were obviously forced on them in 1948. I must tell you guys two things. One, about the influence that you are making. I'm working as an interpreter at Aljazeera, a Hebrew interpreter, and I'm monitoring the Israeli media outlets around the clock. And you must know that sometimes things that come to the discourse of the Israeli media comes because you covered it on social media. Only because of that, they are forced to discuss it. Another thing is the polls that show the support among the American youth, the increasing support towards Palestine and the declining support towards Israel. And it's among the youth, not among the older generation. Why? Because the youth is the one that is exposed to social media posts, your social media posts. So please keep it going. Okay. Now, two things quickly. Your influence is massive. The question is, how is that influence transformed into an action? How is it transformed into a different reality for Palestinians? I see the massive tons of likes and interactions on your social media posts, but then how is it making a difference? Is there a way, and there should be a way, of changing that into a pressure? I won't be saying a lot of things because I will be having to go back to where I come from, and so it's extremely sensitive for me. So, but I need you to please discuss that, and then there's a way to mobilize this interaction, this mountain of interaction, into something that makes the reality different. Now I must rush. Please pardon me because I have to rush. There's a conference for the Israeli defense minister, so I won't stay here to hear your answers, but I will do that afterwards. Thank you so much on behalf of all Palestinians.
Thank you. Can we get one from this side, please, somewhere up there?
So my
And then-
question is also just related to the gentleman's, but I don't work for the Israeli anything.
Let's try and get them straight to the point, because I do want to catch as many
my
people.
question is for Zeena. How can we further amplify Palestinian voices and specifically female Palestinian voices? You gave a very useful list of, boycott, all of advocacy, that list of 5. What else more can we do to put you and people like you and your message and your advocacy forward?
So very quickly, summary of the first question was looking at the idea of not just going to temporary boycotts, but actually permanent ones where you don't need to depend on these anymore. And there has been a popular campaign here in Qatar of no longer needing or requiring a dependence on these things. And maybe that is the natural trajectory or evolution of a boycott, that it shouldn't be a temporary one. It should be something where you no longer depend on those things, right? The second part was more of an analysis of how governments in the Arab region react. I guess there is a theory that they have their hands tied with regards to how the powers of the international community operate, and that those governments who may want to demonstrate some sort of sympathy or support to Palestinians might have consequences to it. And I think there isn't necessarily a disagreement with regards to what is being said in the panel, so much as it is what people are looking at now is that there needs to be some sort of action that is taken, right? That governments need to reflect in whichever ways our means are available to reflect that sentiment that is on the ground, the outrage that is on the ground, and the rejection to it. The other 2 points are a bit similarly connected with regards to translating this to actionable points, either through solidarity specifically in terms of amplifying Palestinian women's voices, or through making this actionable points through maybe civil disobedience, through other things that have been touted around. So I guess everyone can take that as they wish. We'll start with Shaun and end with
Sure.
Tadhg.
I'll start with the boycotts. I absolutely think we're at a pivotal moment where it's very difficult strategically to plan courses of action while so much violence is going on, but we have to be able to do both. And in some ways, many of us were waiting for Palestinians in Gaza to signal that they also wanted that shift. And I think we saw that just even over the past 48 hours of Palestinians in Gaza say, let's not make a hard pivot from telling the stories of the suffering. We must always do that, even just for the sake of documentation. But yes, we have to focus as much of our energy on boycotts, because it is a sure way that we can succeed. And I don't think right now that we have properly identified and communicated, here are the companies and here is why we want you to boycott them indefinitely. I think we have to clarify that. And I think Palestinians in Gaza and Jerusalem and the West Bank are waiting on many of us to do that work for them. It is too difficult right now as they do what they do. So there's a kind of a symbiotic relationship where they ask me and others to do things, and we're also kind of taking cues from them. But we definitely absolutely have to make a hard pivot toward really smart, strong, harsh boycotts. One of my favorite moments in history in the United States is something called the Montgomery bus boycott in the United States in 1954 and 1955, where Dr. Martin Luther King and others led a complete boycott for over a year of the public busing system. And they crippled that system until they finally admitted that that system was racist and discriminatory, and not a single African American for almost 370 days dared step foot on the bus. Well, what that meant was you have to create viable alternatives. And so they created their own taxi system, their own ride-sharing system, and we have to think creatively. All of us, I'll speak for myself, I expected other nations in the region and around the world to have done more by now. And
I am deeply disappointed. I say that to say it is the people. We are going to have to take much of this into our hands because it's clear that the many leaders of the world are one of three things. Either in such deep partnership with Israel and the United States that they dare not betray their partnership. Two, they lack so much courage. They have no courage. They either they have a deep partnership with Israel and the United States, either they lack the courage, or they are, and this is very sincere and legitimate. I've talked to leaders, even here in Doha, leaders from around the world, who are afraid of the violent consequences that may come their way. I'll just say this. I'm not a politician, and so I have sympathy for many leaders that I admire around the world who are saying, I am afraid if I do this, violence may be visited upon my people, and that's very real. But this is that moment where I think any nation will regret not acting. It will be a shame on your legacy. And just as we all erupted in cheers at Yemeni men taking over ships, you would be admired in perpetuity. I say this to any leader around the world. You would be revered if you stood up to these bullies. People would admire you not only for the rest of your life, they would admire you beyond your death, even if you stood up to them and failed. And I think that's the risk that our Yemeni brothers have taken to say, yes, we know that consequences will be meted upon us, but we'll do it anyway. I am waiting for other nations to join them and to have that courage and clarity. But we can also do what we can. We can advocate for sanctions. We can boycott, but we have to do it in a way that is more thorough, more sophisticated, and more severe than we have so far.
So, two things. I'm going to be very quick. We do have to continue to put pressure on our governments. We cannot just say that they are protecting their people and doing the best they can do, because that is not always true. I'll tell you why. Because during the events that was happening in Gaza, there was a discussion about getting water from Israel to Jordan, right? اتفاقية الماء. And in that time, they just stopped giving water to Gaza. They just took away their water. And I had the government of my country, where I was born, they were discussing taking water from them. While there is alternatives, there's always alternatives, which we take gas already, and that's already a form of occupation to our people. And the people have put enough pressure that, according to the government officials, they have shelved that. I'm not sure why it was shelved. I thought it would be going to a garbage, but it was shelved for now. And they stopped the government from doing that, from giving more money and power to Israel over the people of Jordan. So it does matter. We do always have to ask for more. We can't just sit there. Because while we were saying that they're doing our best to protect us, there are things like the gas that we're getting. There are different exchanges. There are different forms of normalizing relationships in different ways that have harmed the Palestinian people more than it helped them. You know, although the narrative is always pushed that we are there to help, some people do that. Some governments do help, but some don't. And that's the reality as well. So no, we're not going to stop putting pressure on our governments. They do not get like a free pass over everything they're doing, just with like a one simple answer, like we're trying to protect our people. The second thing, which I want to end with, I was asked about Palestinian women. What I'm urging everyone here and asking everyone is stop talking about Palestinian women as victims. Stop. They are not the same as the children that are being killed. I keep seeing them in the same categories. They're not helpless. Palestinian women are the strongest women in the entire world. And I say that And I say that, and I'm proud. Every woman in Palestine doesn't only just, like they have different roles. They have suffered from a lot, but they're not victims. They're strong. They're fighters. They're resisting too. They're resisting in different ways. There's different forms of resisting. So the way we amplify their voices, if we speak about them, and we speak about their role, and we actually highlight how important their role in their community is, and we don't address them as the helpless victims of this war and genocide that is happening in Gaza, in Palestine, and everywhere else.
I think as individuals, we have to apply pressure on our governments and our institutions, and I'll give an example in a moment, but I want to focus on what we can do as individuals with our own purchasing power. So we have to educate ourselves on, there's so many companies to boycott, but there are specific companies that are heavily involved, heavily invested in profiting from the occupation of Palestine. So for example, just by show of hands, how many people in here own an HP product? Okay, several people. This is a problem. HP, they manage the biometric identification system. All Palestinians going through a checkpoint have to scan their fingers, and it's HP technology, the hardware provided to the Israelis, that sustain that system, right? So people all over the world should be boycotting HP until they force them to pull out, and that's just one example, right? So we have to educate ourselves, identify these companies, and then raise awareness and also affect them financially. The example of the Montgomery bus boycott system or campaign, would they have admitted that their policies were racist if they were not nearly bankrupt? Probably not, right? It's money that forces them to talk, so we have to hit them where it hurts. That's as individuals. Now, I'm going to give an example. Some people get offended by this. They don't like to hear their own country, right? I'm just going to use it as an example, but really, unfortunately, all the Muslim countries are complicit in abandoning and betraying the Palestinian people. But I'll use this example, and I hope nobody here is offended by it. Azerbaijan, they provide energy to Israel. Through which country? Turkey. Obviously, the Turkish people love Palestine and want to help them. The Turkish government, the same. Of course, they'd love to. But geopolitics, it's very complicated. We need to put pressure on our governments to find alternatives. If Azerbaijan cut off the energy tomorrow, Israel is done. There's a reason why they're attacking people and resisting with such aggression, trying to get people's careers canceled. They want to destroy people, and it's not really a show of strength, it's actually a show of weakness. They're showing you, this is my weak point. Don't apply pressure there, you'll kill me, you'll destroy me. So we have to put pressure on our governments to use what leverage they do have, and as individuals, we need to boycott, these companies and put pressure.
Very quickly, during the height of South African apartheid, a couple of Irish girls, and I mean girls, they were just out of school. One of them was 19, I think the other one was 21, refused to handle South African goods because of the conditions in apartheid South Africa. They worked in a department store in Ireland called Dunn Stores. They were ridiculed. They were faced with the most horrific pushback, but they organized themselves into a small group. I think in the end there was 5 girls and 1 boy, and the oldest was about 25. Like, they had no life experience at all, really, and they protested solidly for 2 years. And at the conclusion of 2 years, they had caused such a fuss and a stir. One of them ended up addressing the UN eventually. Ireland stopped handling goods coming from South Africa, and it played a huge, really significant role in the overall European Union pivot towards the full banning of South African goods, which led ultimately to the end of apartheid. And I just use that as an example that if anyone tells anyone here or in my country or in anyone's country that you're too small or you're too individual to make any significant difference, a couple of girls from Dunn Stores played an absolutely huge role in ultimately ending apartheid in South Africa. And according with every human rights group that we all know and read, this is just today's case of apartheid, and the same way of addressing it and fighting it is applicable.
you know, just as we come to wrap up, Ahmad made a very good point there about points of weakness, right? And I know for everyone who cares a lot about what is happening in Palestine, and also the impact it has, generally speaking, in our region and in the world, in terms of it being maybe the core and the clearest of injustices, and maybe the longest ongoing one that is there. There is a sense of, you know, the lobby that supports this occupation is too powerful, right? Or the consequences are too much and so forth. But really, as you know, somebody who's reported on this for almost 2 decades now and has seen things, I'll tell you, and I agree with Ahmed here, I've never seen the support for the continuation of Israeli apartheid and for the occupation so weak, right? And maybe the depravity in which the Zionists are actually trying to crush humanity is a sign of that weakness, right? The barbarism that is being employed either in Gaza or through other means in the West Bank, or even internationally through political bullying, through economic threats and so forth, is a sign of just how fragile the status is when it comes to the ongoing kind of colonization that is taking place there. And I wanted to end on it because I think it's very important to use that as an understanding. It's not an issue about opinions, and it's not an issue about different perspectives in so much as it is a simple question of freedom and humanity. And I think, you know, we've done a pretty, or you have done a very good job in terms of dissecting one element of that, which is the messaging, which is the communication, the media, and how that impacts. But it really does ultimately come down to, I can't remember who it was who said, you know, the belief, you were saying, of we were right. And that's very simple. You know, we're all going to live for 50, 60, 70, 80 years, and that's it, right? Do you want to have lived that life supporting what is right and being a voice for the voiceless and those who are oppressed, or do you want to live it in the shadows or in the corners, having really no impact whatsoever? So again, I want to thank Aljazeera Media Institute and its director who is here, as well as Qatar Debate and its director who are here for putting this on. I want to thank you all, and obviously thank our distinguished panel of a bunch of mix and match. I don't know who put this together, Muntasir, you know, from Ireland to the United States and traveling through a diaspora of Libya and Palestine as well. So thank you very much, guys, and we'll see you at the next edition.